Welcome, Intro to Administration and Justice students. This is lesson number 8. Lesson number 8, we're talking about the history of prisons. So I'm going to do a real quick synopsis here where I'm going to walk you through the PowerPoint that is loaded there. You have the PowerPoint loaded, and you can go through it yourself also, because mine's going to be low down and dirty and super fast. And I'm basically going for this assignment going to ask you one question, and you're going to answer it. So the history of corrections. This lesson explores history of formal social control. How do we control people when they do bad things? When you look through this, it's not always bad people. Sometimes it's people who make a mistake. Before there was prisons, there was societal norms, and there was things that people did and things that people didn't do. And when they did something bad, then they got in trouble for it. These ancient societies didn't have organized systems to deal with offenders. Justice tended to be private, and they tended to just kind of take care of things themselves. The problem is that it got worse and worse and worse until blood feuds started, and they decided that they had to do something because a lot of people were dying, and it was much heavier than just going to prison. The evolution of prison, you look at all these different things on the PowerPoint, there's a lot of things from torture all the way up to physical labor that they did in prison. When they formed prisons, they went through all these different eras, all these different time frames. And I'm not going to read each and every one of these to you. That's your job, to go back to the PowerPoint and go through them. But look at the years. Look how long ago the evolution of the United States prisons and in other countries started. In 1790 to 1825 was the penitentiary era, where they really just got sick and tired of people doing bad things and not being able to control that. From 1825 to 1876 was the mass prison era. And then the reformatory era, in the late 1800s and early, still the late 1800s. And they thought that they could put people in prison and they could fix them. They would counsel them, they would talk to them. And they found out that that necessarily wasn't the truth. The end of the 1800s, early 1900s was the industrial era. And they basically put them to work and take them out of society and work their butt off. The punitive era, the early 1900s and 1945. If you know anything about history, that's World War II time frame, where they thought that they could just, build large prisons and sock people away. In a way, that's why they built Alcatraz out in San Francisco. If you've never been out there or done a tour of that, very, very interesting tour to do. The prison guards and the prison guards' families lived on that island, along with the inmates and detainees. Then came about the do-gooder era, the treatment era. We're going to fix everybody who goes to prison, and we're going to solve these issues either by shock treatment or medicine or counseling or different things like that. The problem was it generally didn't work. And after it didn't work, they came out with the warehousing era that, you know what, we're simply going to put them in prison. While they're in prison, they're not committing violent crimes. They're not doing bad things. And they really it started the era of nothing works doctrine. No matter what they tried, they could not rehabilitate people. So let's just lock them away, at least for those 7 years. They're not committing sexual assaults or they're not doing bad things. That nothing works doctrine, a belief popularized by an individual in the 1970s, that correctional treatment programs have had little success in rehabilitating offenders. So the 1995, literally up until where we're at, they called a just deserts era. That represents a return to the original purpose of incarceration, which was imprisonment, which is just to keep people out. When they're in prison, they're not doing these heinous things that they do. The problem with all of these things is that the second they get out, and the problem is while they're in prison, do they learn more bad habits? And when they get out of prison, do they learn any job skills? So when they get out of prison, what are they going to do? When they're in prison, they're not learning anything. When they get out, what are they going to do? Who's going to hire them? Who wants them to live right next to them? And then that's a downward spiral from there. If they can't get a job, if they can't do anything, if they can't support a family, then what do they turn to? Their old craft of committing crimes to make money. Lots of methods of corporal punishment throughout time. And when you look at this and you talk about today's prison system, the rates of imprisonment are in the United States of America are high. Now, I want to tell you this. You'll hear this over and over again, that prisons are filled with drug users. Is absolutely 100% not true. People who simply use narcotics do not go to prison. They'll throw out some stats, but I have all the counter stats to prove it's not true. What happens is someone gets a narcotics charge and they're not put away. They're not even held in jail in most cases. Then they go out and they do a residential burglary, and then they do a carjacking, and then they get caught, and they get caught for all three of those crimes: the drugs, the burglary, and the carjacking. And then they plea bargain down the carjacking and the burglary down to simple possession of narcotics, and they send them to prison on that. So when people say the prisons are filled with drug users and that's the only reason they're there, it is not true. It is violent crime, the reason that they go there. Their underlying charge may be something less, but it was a plea bargain or a guilty plea or something like that that allowed that to happen. By the way, less than 1/2 of 1% of all of the prison population in the United States of America is from simple drug possession. None of them is cannabis or marijuana. It's all the heavy stuff. Less than 1/2 of 1%. So when you look at this stuff, why are we overcrowded then? Well, we're overcrowded because more and more people commit violent crimes. You commit the crimes, the police catch you. What are we supposed to do with these people? The federal prison system is known as a little bit easier than some of the other ones. However, it's also rather intense. Usually when you go to federal prison, you go for a long time. Location of long-term confinement facilities in the federal correction system. This map's a little old, but it's all over the place. The security that's on the prison systems, they do a lot of that by classification systems. Are you a gang member? Are you rival gang members? Have you been involved in violent crime? How recent? Have you shot someone? Have you killed someone? Jails versus prisons. Simple explanation is this. A jail houses people for less than a year. Prison houses people for more than a year. Now, the issue is that less than a year, people can actually be in jail a really long time waiting trial. So the question is, and what people talk about quite often now is, well, that's not right that people have to wait in jail till their trial just because they're poor and they have no money. Because the rich people have money and they can get out and they don't have to wait in there. The problem with that philosophy is this. We just had it in the town that I work at, is that someone was released from the county jail. They had been involved in a carjacking and a stolen vehicle. They got released because the jail was overcrowded and the judge decided, I'm just going to let this person out. The second they released them, they walked 4 blocks down the street to the gas station in my town, and they carjacked a car and dragged the victim down the street, literally within minutes of being released from jail. So when you talk about releasing people with no bail, no money, and they immediately, and we're doing that because people are low income and it's more fair that way. Is it fair to the victims? Is it fair to the people that they're terrorizing? So it's something. It's not an easy answer, and it's not a great thing to say. I suspect that many of the jails going forward in prisons, they're going to revamp the way that they do a lot of things. And we're going to get back to much more effective counseling in jobs and job skills and school and things like that maybe actually could make a difference. There's private prisons out there. Most people are not a super fan of them because they make money. They literally make money off of inmates being in there. So here's your one question from this PowerPoint. One question. and one question only. How do we fix this? How do we fix this conundrum that we're in? The conundrum is that none of us want to pay for more prisons and more jails. I don't want my taxes going up. You don't want your taxes going up. How do we fix this where we got to release people from jails because they're overcrowded? It's very expensive to be in there. But the second that they're out, they commit more violent crimes. So your problem to figure out for this is, how do we fix it? Do some research, come up with some ideas. You never know, you may be the next WYSIWYG that solves the world's problems. There you go. Answer the question.